I'm Josh, I'm a qualified actuary and I have a first-class master's in pure mathematics, and here's how to get good at maths in just 6 steps. So step number 1 is to develop the right mindset. So maths is often seen as the science of not being wrong. It emphasises accuracy and methodical thinking. So in order to build those skills, Carl Newport would recommend becoming a craftsman and adopting the craftsman-like mindset. And essentially the craftsman mindset is a commitment to deliberate practice. As Carl Newport says in the book, you need to get good in order to get good things in your working life, and the craftsman mindset is focused on achieving exactly this goal. So the point here is that you should be studying maths with the purpose of getting good at maths, not with the purpose of hitting some sort of milestone on your journey, like passing an exam or getting a lucrative career. The only way you're going to get good at maths is if you actually want to get good at maths and start applying deliberate practice. And by practice, we mean doing repetition on different problems to make sure that you're getting good at solving those problems. And by deliberate practice, we mean focusing on specific areas which you might be weak at, or areas where you want to improve, or practicing with a specific goal in mind, like I'm going to get really good at differentiation this week, for example. I think lots of people think that maths will guarantee you a really good job, and that's definitely not the case. When I was going through my graduate recruitment, I definitely found that no one really cared that I had a maths degree, and it was all about getting through the front door and then selling yourself in interview and demonstrating your broader skills. I love in The Trading Game by Gary Stevenson, he talks about economics degrees from LSE being like lottery tickets for grad schemes in banking, and I think lots of people view maths in that way. But you're never going to get good at maths if that's your end goal. You should really enjoy the deliberate practice part of maths, and if you enjoy the kind of problem solving element, you're more likely to continue it, and therefore you're more likely to get really good at it and become a craftsman. The other element is that maths changes quite a lot at university, so if you're looking to get better and better at maths, then that's obviously a good thing. Your horizons have been expanded. But if you're just looking to get a qualification, pass your exams, and you're basing that, and you're doing your maths degree because you did quite well at A-level maths, then you're unlikely to enjoy that. And I definitely found that when I started at university, the amount of people that hated the course because it didn't resemble A-level maths was huge. And I definitely found my stride at university, but a lot of my peers actually did everything they could to get away from doing maths courses, and they did French and English and extra add-ons. So make sure that you're doing what you actually want to do and what you actually enjoy doing, because that's the most important thing, and that's what's going to make it sustainable over the long run. Another way I applied the craftsman mindset to maths is that I was extremely fastidious in the way I constructed my proofs and my answers to questions, because you're only going to get accuracy and clarity of thought when you're very clear and methodical in your writing. Maths is the sort of subject where it's very easy to make a silly mistake or miss a piece of detail. So the most important thing I found was to make everything as neat as possible. And in that way, I took absolute pride in my work. I actually used the same yellow paper for all of my maths degree, which was actually a bit silly because I struggled to source it at times, but it meant that my notes were immaculate and I took great pride in my work. This is also covered off in Robert Greene's book Mastery, which I think is an absolutely brilliant book if you want to get good at something. And he says, the principle is simple and must be engraved deeply in your mind. The goal of an apprenticeship is not money, good position, a title or a diploma, but rather the transformation of your mind and character. First transformation on the way to mastery. So step number 2 is to practice deliberately. So in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, he says, practice isn't the thing you do once you're good, it's the thing that you do that makes you good. So you need to set specific actionable goals during your practice to make that practice deliberate, and so you can measure and see your improvement over time. So a great way of doing this might be taking a past paper at the end of your revision session, and then you might see your marks increase over time as you practice the material deliberately and learn from your mistakes, as you see your improvement over time and learn from your mistakes and see progress, which is actually one of the most satisfying things. Lots of people think that maths is all about ingrained natural talent, and it is to some extent. So maths isn't all about natural ingrained talent. A lot of it is down to deliberate practice. And I did a huge amount of practice when I was going through my school life, my university career definitely, and even into my professional qualifications as an actuary. Revision was essential. I used to think that revision was cheating, which I know is ridiculous. I felt like you should just, not have to prep and you should just turn up and it should be a measure of natural ingrained talent. But that was pretty naive and pretty stupid of me, to be honest, and stuff got really hard. And so revision was essential. I was pretty rubbish at the deliberate part, the deliberate practice. I just used to hit volume. And you probably heard in one of my other videos where I talk about volume versus efficiency versus effectiveness. And when you don't know what you're doing, you just hit volumes, just do loads and loads. And then when you get a bit better, you focus on efficiency. And that's about learning very quickly and easily. And then the final point is being effective. So 80-20 might be an example of effectiveness. You might look up which types of questions come up very frequently and make sure you can just nail those. So I was pretty naive and just focused on the volume side of things, but you could definitely start focusing on efficiency and effectiveness if you know what you're doing now. In Matthew's side's Black Box Thinking, he talks a bit about practice and how important it is to do this. So he says that, in effect, practice is about harnessing the benefits of learning from failure while reducing its costs. It is better to fail in practice in preparation for the big stage than on the big stage itself. This is true of organisations too, which conduct pilot schemes, and in the case of aviation and other safety critical industries, test ideas in simulators in order to learn before rolling out new ideas or procedures. The more we can fail in practice, the more we can learn, enabling us to succeed when it really matters. So that's a great example of why you need to actually embrace failure in your revision and learn from those mistakes as early and as quickly as possible so you can move on, start integrating them into your assessment and answers to questions so that when you hit the big stage, i.e. your exam, you can nail these answers. And that leads me to step number 3, which is iterative learning and feedback. So learning effectively often looks very inefficient and takes a lot of time, and that's probably why a lot of people give up early. But the key to learning is fast feedback and quick iterations. So this is covered off really well in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. This is probably my most referenced book on my whole YouTube channel, but it's absolutely worth its weight in gold. And there's a section in it which talks about how people learn quickly and how people learn from mistakes quickly. He has this quote which says, "Whether professionals have a chance to develop intuitive expertise depends essentially on the quality and the speed of feedback, as well as on sufficient opportunity to practice." So there we have it. He talks about you need lots of opportunities to practice, but you also need quick and fast feedback. So this is something that I didn't apply in my revision or study at all. It's something that I wish I'd done a lot earlier. And I think teachers don't really tell you to do this at all either, because it feels like cheating. But if you don't know the answer to a question, or even if you kind of think you do, maybe for the first few problems, just look at the answers and work out how you got there. So you learn the method. I think the amount of times I was sat in school and I would get given a bunch of questions to do, let's say I had to do 20 questions on a topic to practice, and they said that we weren't allowed to look at the answers. So I would make a mistake in the first one, and that same mistake in the second one, and the third one. A much better way of doing it would have been to try the first question, make a mistake, look at the answer, realise what I did wrong, and then do the next question, now knowing the mistake that I made and rectifying it to make sure I didn't make the same mistake again. It seems absolutely obvious now, but I think there was something around the way we were taught at school which meant that we weren't allowed to look at answers. Obviously, towards the end of your revision and as you start getting these problems right, you don't want to be looking at your answers, but it's a crucial part of learning. And I could have gone a whole hour's lesson doing the wrong method, for example, because I wasn't allowed to check until the end. The best thing to do is get quick feedback and then course correct as quickly as possible and then move on. This is also covered in Richard Thaler's book, Misbehaving, and he says that psychologists tell us that in order to learn from experience, 2 ingredients are necessary: frequent practice and immediate feedback. So there we go. If you want to become great at maths, you have to learn lots, and here's the best way to learn. Now, step number 4 is about understanding concepts deeply. So as highlighted in range, successful problem solvers often have a deep understanding of the underlying concepts behind the problems they're trying to solve. This means that they're not just mechanically applying formulas, but they have a real deep understanding of the question at hand and all the topics that are linked to it. I remember seeing a great metaphor on the internet, which was how Elon Musk remembers really complicated things. And he talks about thinking about knowledge as a tree. And he doesn't bother remembering all the little facts, which are the leaves on the tree. He remembers the trunk of the tree, which is the kind of deep underlying core principle behind all the facts. I think you can definitely apply that to maths. Now, I know in a previous video I said that you can use pattern recognition to basically see what the problem's asking, quickly recall the method to apply to it, and turn the handle and get the answer. So that's one way of passing exams, but this is about getting really good at maths. So the key to getting good at maths is understanding the deep concepts behind the question and understanding what we're trying to get at by answering the question. A great quote I love from the book Range says that successful problem solvers are more able to determine the deep structure of a problem before they proceed to match a strategy to it. Less successful problem solvers are more like students in the ambiguous sorting task. They mentally classify problems only by superficial, overly stated features like the domain context. Problem solving begins with the typing of the problem. As education pioneer John Dewey puts it in Logic, the theory of inquiry, a problem well put is half solved. So that reminds me of the adage that people talk about with AI, where it's more about asking the right questions now rather than finding the answers, which I really like. And I know I gave advice in previous videos just to perhaps follow that mechanical way, but if you really want to get good at maths, you have to understand the core deep concepts behind a lot of what's going on. So step number 5 is to embrace logical reasoning. So mathematics is quite unique in that it's not about empirical testing like a lot of science, so basically gathering data from the real world and testing hypotheses using statistics. Maths is about logical deduction from axioms. That means to get really good at maths, you have to understand the logical flow and coherence of mathematical arguments, which are often kind of posed in some sort of axiomatic space. To get good at maths at university, which is all based on theorems, proofs, lemmas, all the rest of it, you have to really understand the language of that, which is logic. And logic is its own topic within philosophy degrees typically, and I actually did a logic course as part of my mathematics degree. I wish I understood this earlier because I hadn't actually come across logic until I started at university, and it's not taught at A-level and it's not taught at GCSE, but it would have stood me in amazing stead for my degree course and actually helped me with some of my university applications and entrance exams because it came up a lot in there. So a classic logical puzzle, which I was actually asked in one of my entrance interviews, was the Watson selection task. So this is how it's set up. Imagine a set of 4 cards is placed on a table. Each of them has a number on one side and a colour on the other. The visible faces on the cards are 5 and 8, blue and green. Which cards must you turn over in order to test the proposition that if a card shows an even number on one face, then the opposite face is blue? So I was actually posed this in my entrance interview for Cambridge University, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But I've recently found it in the book Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, because he talks about how you can frame things more intuitively to get a better answer from people. This is basically a logical test because the proposition is a logical statement. It basically says if the card is even on one side, then it is blue on the other side. So it's basically saying even implies blue, which is actually logically the same as not blue implies not even, but it's not the same as blue implies even, because that's the statement in reverse. So you're supposed to know this logical principle of implication, and that will tell you that the cards you need to turn over are the... Well, I'm not going to spoil it actually. I'm not going to tell you. Go work it out. Lots of people get this wrong on the first attempt, myself included. Most people don't have the intuition around logic puzzles. It's not very intuitive. But if you study logic, you understand it immediately. And Rory Sutherland actually does a great way of reframing this in his book Alchemy, where he says basically if you set it up as a puzzle around drinking age, it's really intuitive and everyone gets the right answer straight away. So yeah, a great example of how logic is the underpin for mathematics, and that's not something that's very well known or communicated because at A-level we don't even go there. And to kind of bookend this section, I love this quote from The Art of Logic by Gina Cheng. And she says, "The rules of scientific discovery involve experiments, evidence, and replicability. The rules of mathematical discovery do not involve any of those things. They involve logical proof. Mathematical truth is established by constructing logical arguments, and that is all." Then step number 6, the final step to get really good at maths, is to adjust to real-life applications. So basically maths is this theoretical world where you're kind of deducing truths from pre-imposed axioms, which is really fun and creates a lot of beauty in the world. But when you try and apply this to the real world, it really doesn't make sense a lot of the time, and that's why we have statistics. I love the quote from Ian Stewart in Does God Play Dice, where he says that statistics is basically like panning for order in complexity. And I don't know if any of you have done any experiments where you have a mathematical model and you're trying to replicate the model in real life. You typically find there's always outliers. So to summarize, another quote from Ian Stewart in Does God Play Dice is, "No mathematics occurs in the real world. What it does is model the real world in a useful manner." So maths is not real life. And I think lots of people forget that. They come up with complicated mathematical models used to predict reality and believe them and fail to account for the outliers. And it's the outliers that often get people. I think in Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, he talks about this a lot because mathematical finance is full of this. So what you tend to find is that mathematical models work really well in physics, so like physical sciences, and I think quantum mechanics has been proved to a ridiculous level of accuracy. Newton's laws of physics work with incredible accuracy, and then obviously Einstein's theory of general relativity work at a massive degree of accuracy as well. But as soon as you start thinking about even biology and then maybe moving into the social sciences definitely and economics definitely, these mathematical theories typically fall apart and you have to make some pretty heroic assumptions for them to work. I think lots of people forget that. I don't know if you've heard of long-term capital management, but that was a hedge fund run by a bunch of Nobel Prize winning economists and mathematicians that came up with the Black-Scholes formula, and that eventually blew up because they were following the models too closely and didn't account for the outliers, and so were overly optimized, which caused them to blow up in a market crisis. So yeah, this can have significant real-world impacts. So to be really good at maths, you have to understand that maths is separate from the real world, but it is a quite good, useful tool in some areas. And again, I'll finish with another quote from The Art of Logic. Mathematics is, of course, not life, and logical proofs don't quite work in real life. This is because real life has much more nuance and uncertainty than the mathematical world. The mathematical world has been set up specifically to eliminate that uncertainty, but we can't just ignore that aspect of real life. So there we have it. Yeah, I definitely fell foul of this in my life. I think lots of people like to try and optimize their life, assuming some sort of mathematical payoff structure. Maybe they set themselves up as econs where they can automatically kind of calculate the cost benefit of everything in the world at any one point. They're the ultimate consumer because they understand their utility and they're able to optimize across an infinite number of products and choices. But let's be serious, that's not true. And it definitely took me a while to get to that point. It doesn't stop you from being really good at maths. So there we have it. That was my 6 ways to actually get good at maths. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to hear more from me, don't forget to check out this one here. Thanks.